Pherecydes, a story of young Pythagoras. The tyrant's final gift. As the ship bearing Pythagoras pulled away from the harbour of Samos, its wake carved a stark line through the wine-dark Aegean. Polycrates watched from the high window of his palace. The structure itself seemed to embody its master's character, imposing, yet elegant. Its marble columns gleamed with an almost unnatural perfection in the golden afternoon light, as if asserting dominion not only over the island, but over beauty itself. The tyrant stood motionless. His silk robes trimmed with Tyrian purple barely stirred in the salt-laden breeze, his ringed fingers resting lightly on the sun-warmed stone of the windowsill. A storm of conflicted emotions wrestled beneath the calm facade he presented to the world. The boy, Pythagoras, had become a source of disquiet, not in the overt manner of conspirators with their hushed plots and concealed daggers, but in a way far more subtle and unsettling. It was as if the youth had somehow developed an internal compass, one that pointed toward an absolute truth. A truth that existed independent of power, or pragmatism. Pythagoras had begun to hold the tyrant's pronouncements and deeds up to an unseen measure, an internal standard of rightness that Polycrates neither comprehended nor could command. And this, more than any armed rebellion, had begun to gnaw at the foundations of the tyrant's self-assurance. Yet, despite this unease, or perhaps because of it, the tyrant could not bring himself to deal with the youth in the decisive, final manner often employed by rulers faced with inconvenient subjects. Something in those clear, questioning eyes as penetrating as a winter sky at dawn, eyes that seemed to perceive an order in the world where others saw only happenstance, had sown a seed of doubt in Polycrates' own pragmatic mind. What if the boy sensed proportions beyond his own understanding? What if Pythagoras's quiet insistence on a life lived with integrity held a deeper insight that he, the master of expediency, could not fully grasp? These questions haunted Polycrates in the still hours of night, when the candles guttered low and even the most powerful men are forced to confront the spectres of their doubts. "My lord," his most trusted adviser ventured, maintaining a deferential distance as he approached across the mosaic floor depicting the naval triumph that had secured Polycrates' rule. "The arrangements for the boys' journey, they are complete." Glypis was a man shaped by decades of political survival. His lean face bore the permanent half-smile of one who had mastered the art of appearing both agreeable and inscrutable. His thinning hair was meticulously arranged to disguise its retreat, and his unassuming brown robes belied the fact that he wielded more practical influence than any general in the tyrant's service. Polycrates turned from the window. The golden signet ring on his finger caught the light like a captured star as he moved, his expression unreadable beneath his carefully trimmed beard. "Yes, but there is one final detail." He gestured to another attendant, a younger man who had been standing so perfectly still in the chamber's shadowed corner that he seemed almost a part of the architecture itself. The man stepped forward bearing a sealed scroll, its wax impression bearing the distinctive emblem of the tyrant's personal decree. "I have chosen guardians for him, a worthy couple, Nicarchus and Pythes. The husband, a gem engraver of considerable skill, accustomed to travels through lands both familiar and foreign. His hands can coax beauty from the most obstinate stone, revealing what lies hidden within, a gift not unlike the boy's own. The wife, a woman known for her keen mind and quiet fortitude, whose lineage traces back to the old priestly families of Delos, though she wears her heritage lightly. "Guardians, my lord?" Glypis queried, a flicker of confusion disturbing his carefully maintained composure. His eyes darted briefly to the scroll before returning to his master's face. "I had understood this to be an exile." The last word emerged delicately, as if it were a fragile object that might shatter if handled too roughly. "It is an exile," Polycrates affirmed, his voice hardening slightly, acquiring the edge that had caused stronger men than Glypis to instinctively step backward. "But it is also an investment. The boy possesses a rare quality of mind, too uncommon to be entirely discarded. It shines through his childish righteousness like sunlight through shallow water. Should he endure, should his intellect flourish in other lands under the tutelage of those who understand its nature, perhaps one day what he learns might benefit Samos once more, from a necessary distance." "You anticipate his return, then?" Glypis ventured, his question careful, probing the dimensions of his master's intentions without presuming too much. "No," Polycrates replied, a surprising softness touching his tone as he looked towards a silver bowl on the altar next to him, the very same bowl he had bestowed upon Eupolinos, a token payment for an immeasurable achievement. It caught the afternoon light oddly, seeming to glow with a cold, reproachful fire. "Some departures are final, but his thoughts, his way of seeing, may yet reach our shores, carried by others, like seeds on the wind." He gestured dismissively, his hand cutting through the air with the definitiveness that signaled the end of the discussion. As his advisers withdrew, moving with the practiced silence of those who serve at the pleasure of absolute power, Polycrates returned his gaze to the diminishing speck of the ship sailing towards the horizon. In the intricate balance of power that shaped his every action, this decision, neither true mercy nor outright rejection, struck a precarious equilibrium. The tyrant could not then imagine that this ambiguous gesture, this final act of stewardship, if not love, would inadvertently set in motion one of the most profound intellectual journeys of the ancient world. The unlikely guardians. 3 days into the voyage, as the ship wove its way through the scattered jewels of islands studding the Aegean, some little more than juts of weathered rock where seabirds roost in cacophonous colonies, others shrouded in the living green of pine and cypress, Pythagoras remained largely by himself, trying to understand his feelings. The vessel itself was a sturdy trading craft, its wooden hull bearing the scars of countless journeys, its sail patched in places yet still efficiently catching the capricious Mediterranean winds. The crew, sinewy men burnished dark by sun and salt, moved about their tasks with a practised economy of motion, occasionally casting curious glances at the solitary youth, who seemed more interested in the pattern of waves than in the usual excitements of travel. He spent hours observing the shifting play of light upon the water, noting how the sea's surface fragmented the sun into countless dancing reflections, yet somehow maintained an underlying coherence. He found in the rhythmic surge and fall of waves a sense of inherent order, not chaotic, but following some principle he could sense but not yet articulate. It was there, while gazing at the sea's endless expanse as the afternoon light burnished its surface to a metallic sheen, that he first heard the measured tread of footsteps approaching from behind. Young Pythagoras, a deep, calm voice addressed him, resonant yet gentle, like distant thunder without threat. "I believe it is time for proper introductions." Turning, Pythagoras found himself facing a man of mature years, tall and lean, with the keen, focused eyes of a craftsman, eyes that did not merely see but observed, assessing with precision honed through decades of work that demanded absolute accuracy. Despite his age, evident in the silver threading through his once dark hair and the fine network of lines at the corners of his eyes, there was a supple strength to his movements, a deliberate grace. His hands, when he gestured, revealed themselves as his most expressive feature, strong yet capable of extraordinary delicacy. The fingertips slightly flattened from years of precise pressure against resistant materials. Beside him stood a woman whose quiet dignity seemed to create an aura of stillness amidst the ceaseless motion of the ship. Her features were regular rather than striking, but arranged with a harmony that became more apparent the longer one looked. Her dark hair, streaked with only a few threads of silver, was bound simply at the nape of her neck, and her eyes, a deep brown that approached black, held a quality of thoughtful assessment that made Pythagoras feel as if she were reading far more from his face than he intended to reveal. "I am Nisarchus," the man continued, offering a slight inclination of his head, a gesture that conveyed respect without subservience. "And this is my wife, Pythes. It appears we are to be companions on more than just this sea journey." Pythagoras arched an eyebrow, his young face, not yet fully formed from boyhood into the man he would become, settling into lines of wariness. "By whose decree?" His voice carried the faintest edge of defiance, a quality that had emerged more strongly since his confrontation with Polycrates over Eupolenos's reward. "By Polycrates himself," Pythes answered, her voice melodious yet possessing an underlying firmness, like a harp string perfectly tensioned. "Though I suspect the fullness of his reasons, and the entire scope of his intentions, were not shared with us. The tyrant, like most men of power, prefers to keep even his beneficiaries uncertain of the complete design." "Then you are his agents," Pythagoras stated, his tone flat as he turned back to the sea, his shoulders stiffening beneath the simple linen of his tunic. "We are artisans," Nisarchus gently corrected, moving to stand beside the youth at the ship's railing. The weathered wood beneath their hands seemed to connect them in some subtle way, both touching the same material at the same moment. He extended his hands, palms upward, revealing the calluses and minute scars that spoke of a gem-engraver's lifelong dedication to his craft. Some fingertips bore the distinctive slight discoloration from years of contact with certain polishing compounds, and a particularly notable scar traced the base of his left thumb, evidence of an early mistake, perhaps, in handling the sharp tools of his trade. "I shape raw stone into forms of beauty. My wife shapes thoughts and words with wisdom. We serve our crafts, Pythagoras, not tyrants." That distinction may seem subtle now, but it is one you will come to understand more deeply, I think. "What Polycrates offered," Pythes added, her intelligent eyes studying the young man with open curiosity that held no hint of condescension despite the difference in their ages, "was an opportunity to travel, to see lands and peoples beyond Samos, to accompany a young mind that might benefit from practical guidance while navigating unfamiliar territories, both physical and intellectual." What he did not explicitly state, though rumor had already carried it to our ears, was that our charge would be the remarkably perceptive youth who had discerned the solution to the great tunnel of Eupolenos, the boy who saw through stone. Something in her directness, in the unexpected candor of this couple, who bore themselves with neither the fawning deference of those currying favor nor the brittle authority of those imposing control, caused Pythagoras to pause and reconsider. He turned fully towards them now, examining them with the same focused intensity he might apply to a complex riddle. "And you accepted this guardianship willingly?" he inquired, his suspicion still evident but now tempered with genuine curiosity. "With certain understandings," Nicarchus replied, a subtle smile playing on his lips, causing the creases around his eyes to deepen like the satisfying facets of a well-cut gem. "We are to accompany you, yes. To offer practical assistance in unfamiliar lands, certainly. The world beyond Samos can be bewildering in its diversity, and not always welcoming to solitary travelers, especially those as young as yourself. But we expressly decline to act as your wardens, or as informants for Polycrates. We made this clear, despite the risk such frankness entailed. Our role, as we defined it, is to facilitate your journey, not to constrain its direction." Pythes reached into the folds of her robe, a garment dyed the deep blue of twilight, simply cut but of fine material, and withdrew a small object. It proved to be a perfectly formed sphere of clear crystal, its facets expertly cut and polished to catch the light, transforming the simple sunlight into prismatic brilliance. She offered it to Pythagoras without ceremony, but with a certain intentness, as if the gesture itself carried significance beyond the mere sharing of an object. "My husband fashioned this," she explained as Pythagoras accepted it, turning the cool crystal over in his hands. Its weight was surprising, heavier than expected for its size, as if the density of the stone somehow concentrated not just matter, but meaning. "Observe how it gathers the light, how it bends and reveals the hidden colors within. The stone itself is unchanged, yet through careful shaping, it reveals aspects of light that remain invisible to us in its ordinary form." "It is remarkable," Pythagoras murmured, genuinely struck by the precision and beauty of the craftsmanship. The crystal seemed to respond to even the slightest movement, flashing internal fires that appeared and vanished as he rotated it. "Just as this crystal transforms simple light," Nicarchus said, his voice taking on the gentle cadence of one sharing a principle central to his understanding of the world. "We believe that knowledge and experience transform the spirit. The core essence remains, but its capacity to perceive and reflect truth expands. We have heard tales of how you perceive patterns and underlying truths where others see only disorder or chance. We hope to learn from your way of seeing, Pythagoras, even as we attend to your practical needs on this journey." Pythagoras looked from one to the other, his initial reserve slowly yielding to a cautious curiosity. The crystal in his palm seemed to pulse with a life of its own as a ray of afternoon sun struck it directly. "And if my quest for understanding leads us along paths Polycrates would not sanction?" Pythes laughed, a sound of unexpected warmth that seemed to briefly transform the space around them, making the creaking timbers of the ship and the endless murmur of the waves momentarily recede. "Young man," she said, "we have already embarked upon a ship that sails away from a tyrant's dominion. The remainder of the voyage, and where it leads, is for us to discover together. There is an old saying among the priestesses of Delos, 'Truth is a harsh mistress, but a faithful one.' We have chosen, long ago, to serve that mistress, even when her demands prove inconvenient to those who wield power." Over the ensuing days, as the vessel charted its course through the island-dotted sea, navigating channels where the water turned from deep cobalt to startling turquoise as it flowed over submerged sandbanks, passing shores where white-walled villages clung to steep hillsides like clustered seashells, a tentative bond began to form between the young exile and his thoughtful guardians. Nicarchus shared the meticulous disciplines of his gem-cutting art, demonstrating how the precise angle of each facet was essential to the ultimate effect, how symmetry and proportion could transform rough stone into an object of compelling beauty. His explanations were patient, enhanced by decades of practice, often illustrated with small sketches drawn with a stylus on a wax tablet he carried. Pythais, in turn, revealed herself to be a woman of broad learning, familiar with the rich oral traditions and poetic accounts of both the Hellenic world and lands that lay further to the east. On evenings when the sea was calm and a rich tapestry of stars unveiled itself above the gently rocking vessel, she would speak of ancient wisdom traditions, some preserved in texts, others transmitted solely through the living chain of teacher to student. Unlike the formal education Pythagoras had received under Polycrates' patronage, with its emphasis on practical knowledge and demonstrable skills, Pythais spoke of understanding that transcended utility, of a deep coherence that bound apparent opposites into a greater whole. By the time they disembarked at the island of Syros, the three had moved beyond the roles of ward and guardians. They were becoming, instead, a small fellowship, united by a shared spirit of inquiry and a growing mutual respect that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. The Sage of Syros. Syros, though less grand than Samos, possessed its own stark beauty. Where Samos was lush with cultivated groves and gardens made possible by its network of springs and streams, Syros embodied a harsher, more elemental appeal. Rocky headlands rose dramatically from the sea, their weathered faces scored by millennia of wind and salt, enclosing sheltered coves where fishing boats bobbed like resting seabirds. The island's soil, thin but surprisingly fertile wherever it had accumulated in protected valleys, supported hardy crops, mountain herbs that released intense fragrance when brushed against compact olive trees whose roots seemed to draw nourishment from the very stone itself, and sprawling vines whose grapes, though small, produced wine of unusual complexity and character. Terraced hillsides climbed inland, planted with ancient olive trees whose silver-green leaves shimmered in the bright sunlight, their gnarled trunks bearing witness to generations of careful tending. The main settlement was modest but tidy, its buildings constructed of local stone that had weathered to the same golden grey as the surrounding landscape, as if the dwellings had grown organically from the island itself. There was a quietness to Syros that contrasted sharply with the bustling commercial energy of Samos, not a stillness of inactivity, but rather the deeper calm of a place whose rhythms were attuned more to the eternal cycles of nature than to the fluctuating demands of commerce and politics. Yet Pythagoras barely registered these natural charms, for his attention was drawn to a modest dwelling perched on a slope overlooking the main harbour. Unlike the clustered buildings of the town below, this structure stood in splendid isolation, surrounded by a grove of ancient olive trees whose massive trunks suggested they had stood sentinel on that hillside since before the age of heroes. The dwelling itself was simple but perfectly proportioned, its stone walls blending harmoniously with the landscape while its positioning caught both the morning and afternoon light. A small herb garden, meticulously maintained despite the challenging conditions, surrounded the entrance, filling the air with a mingled sense of thyme, rosemary, and other plants that Pythagoras could not immediately identify. There, Nicarchus indicated, pointing towards the simple stone structure, the home of Pherecydes. The name alone commanded a sense of reverence. Throughout their voyage, Pythais had spoken of Pherecydes of Syros with profound respect, a man who was neither poet nor priest in the customary sense, yet seemed to embody vital aspects of both. He was, she had explained, one of the first thinkers to articulate his understanding of the cosmos and existence in straightforward prose, rather than veiling his insights in the traditional forms of verse and elaborate myth. His writings, though few had circulated beyond the circle of his direct students, were said to present a vision of the world's origins and structure that differed significantly from the familiar tales taught to children. Most intriguing to Pythagoras was Pythes' mention that Pherecydes held unique views on the nature of the soul and its journey, views that resonated with certain ancient traditions from lands far to the east. "Is he expecting us?" Pythagoras asked, a sudden awareness of his own youth and relative inexperience arising as he contemplated meeting such a renowned figure. His hand unconsciously moved to straighten his simple tunic, a gesture both futile and revealing of his inner uncertainty. "He is expecting you," Pythes corrected gently, her emphasis subtle but unmistakable. "Word of your insight regarding the tunnel of Eupolinos has a way of traveling, carried by merchant vessels and visiting scholars, spreading through the subtle networks that connect those who value such rare perceptions. And Pherecydes has always possessed an uncanny intuition for arrivals that hold significance. He once told me, many years ago when I was scarcely older than you are now, that true meetings are arranged by forces beyond our ordinary understanding, that minds destined to influence each other will find their way together despite geography or circumstance. The path leading to the philosopher's dwelling wound upwards through fragrant herbs that released their scent with each footfall, creating an aromatic cloud that seemed to both clear the mind and subtly alter ordinary awareness. Stone steps appeared where the slope steepened, worn smooth by generations of seekers who had made this same ascent. By the time they reached the level ground before the entrance, a figure had already emerged from the doorway, an elderly man, his beard white as sea foam but his posture remarkably straight, leaning lightly on a staff of polished olive wood. His face was deeply lined, not merely with age, but with the particular geography that a lifetime of intense thought etches into human features. His eyes, however, were startlingly clear and penetrating, seeming to belong to a much younger man, as if the vigor of his mind had preserved this one aspect of youth while allowing the rest of his physical form to age naturally. "The one who saw the path through the mountain arrives," Pherecydes stated, his voice surprisingly resonant and clear, carrying an authority that emanated not from volume but from a quality of precision and intentness, as if each word were carefully selected from countless possibilities. Or rather, the one who discerned the straight line through the enveloping darkness. The distinction he made was subtle but significant, emphasizing perception over mere physical achievement. Pythagoras bowed deeply, a gesture of genuine respect rather than mere formality. "Master Pherecydes, I am honored by your welcome." The old philosopher's eyes, bright and keen beneath his heavy brows, studied Pythagoras with searching intensity. There was nothing casual in his assessment. It was as if he were reading the young man's entire history and potential in the set of his shoulders, the particular tilt of his head, the quality of his attention. "Honor is a custom. Understanding is the pursuit. Do you seek it, young man?" "I do," Pythagoras answered without hesitation, meeting the elder's gaze directly. "Then formality is unnecessary. Come." He gestured towards the dwelling's entrance, then glanced at Nicarchus and Pythes, acknowledging their presence with a slight nod that somehow conveyed both respect and dismissal. "Your companions will find suitable lodging in the village below. They understand, I trust, that what passes between a seeker and one who shares insights requires a certain quietude." The last word emerged with a particular emphasis, suggesting layers of meaning beyond mere silence, perhaps the internal stillness necessary for the reception of subtle truths. Nicarchus nodded, resting a reassuring hand briefly on Pythagoras's shoulder. "We will see you when your learning permits," he said. "The nature of true education cannot be hurried, or bound by arbitrary schedules." As his guardians descended the path, their figures gradually diminishing against the backdrop of the town and harbour below. Pythagoras followed Pherecydes into the cool, shaded interior of the dwelling. The transition from bright sunlight to the muted illumination within momentarily blinded him, but as his vision adjusted, he found himself in a space of surprising harmony. The main room was simply furnished with a table of polished olive wood, several low stools, and shelves lined with scrolls, some bearing the distinctive appearance of Egyptian papyrus, others the characteristic texture of parchment from various regions. The floor was swept clean, with a central hearth that appeared regularly used but meticulously maintained. The walls, whitewashed and plain, held no decorative elements save for a series of drawn diagrams that immediately captured Pythagoras's focused attention. These were not mere ornamental patterns. They appeared to be visual representations of concepts, some recognizably geometric, showing relationships between lines and curves, others more abstract, suggesting processes or transformations through carefully arranged symbols. One entire section of wall depicted what seemed to be a schematic representation of celestial movements, with concentric circles and radiating lines creating a complex web of relationships. Though some symbols were familiar from his studies in Samos, others were entirely novel to him, their meanings tantalizingly beyond his grasp. "You recognize these forms?" Pherecydes asked, observing his interest with the subtle satisfaction of one who has deliberately laid out a trail for an expected traveller. "Some, yes," Pythagoras replied, his finger tracing the outline of one particularly intricate pattern, hovering just above the surface without touching it, as if the diagram possessed a tangible energy he hesitated to disturb. The relationship between triangles with specific proportions, the properties of circles, but others. His voice trailed off as his attention was caught by a sequence of figures that seemed to suggest mathematical relationships he had never contemplated. "They suggest relationships and orders I have not previously considered." "Good," Pherecydes said, lowering himself onto a stool with the deliberate movements of one who has learned to accommodate the limitations of age without surrendering to them. "You perceive what is present, not merely what you expect to find. That is where our exploration shall begin, not with answers I might provide, but with questions that arise naturally from honest observation." The days that followed settled into a rhythm that would continue for many months, each one building upon the insights of those that had preceded it. Mornings often commenced before dawn, with careful observation of the stars as they faded with the approaching daylight, Pherecydes guiding Pythagoras to recognize not just the patterns of constellations, but the deep sense of order in their celestial movements. The old philosopher spoke of these patterns not as arbitrary groupings imposed by human imagination, but as reflections of a cosmic harmony that existed independent of perception, yet could be apprehended through disciplined attention. The daylight hours were filled with rigorous discourse, exploring prevailing ideas about the cosmos, the fundamental nature of existence, and the relationship between perceived forms and underlying principles. Pherecydes would often challenge conventional explanations, not dismissing them outright, but examining their underlying assumptions, testing their internal coherence. These discussions frequently occurred during walks along the rugged coastal paths of Syros, where the confluence of land, sea, and sky provided a living context for contemplating elemental forces and their interactions. "Notice," Pherecydes would say, pausing at a point where waves crashed against an unyielding cliff face, "how water, seemingly the most yielding of elements, can, over sufficient time, reshape even the most obdurate stone. There is a lesson here about the nature of persistence, yes, but also about the relationship between apparent opposites, solidity and fluidity, resistance and accommodation, stability and change. But it was the evenings that most profoundly shaped Pythagoras's developing intellect. As lamps were lit and shadows lengthened across the stone floor, creating a space that seemed somehow both intimate and vast. Pherecydes would transition from guide to storyteller, sharing what he termed the older truths, conceptions of existence that predated the familiar tales of the Olympian gods, ideas about the journey of the soul that differed significantly from conventional Greek beliefs. These accounts were not presented as mere myths or legends, but as symbolic expressions of insights gained through generations of careful observation and inner contemplation. "The poets weave engaging narratives," Pherecydes told him one such evening, his voice taking on a particular resonance in the lamp-lit chamber. "And the priests maintain necessary rituals that bind communities to their past and to each other. Both serve essential functions in our collective life, but both, in their distinct ways, can obscure as much as they reveal. What I seek, and what I believe you also seek, Pythagoras, is the unadorned reality that lies beneath the surface of embellishments. And that reality possesses an inherent order?" Pythagoras ventured, recalling the remarkable way the two ends of the great tunnel had met beneath Mount Castro, not by chance or divine intervention, but through the application of precise geometric principles. "Order is its very nature, yes," the old philosopher agreed, his gnarled hand gesturing toward the night sky visible through the open doorway, where stars maintained their stately procession across the heavens. "But order is merely the expression of something deeper, a reflection, if you will, of an underlying principle. What that order expresses is a kind of harmony, a fundamental coherence that binds apparent randomness into a meaningful whole." Pherecydes rose and moved to a wooden chest in the corner of the room, its surface polished by years of handling. From it, he carefully withdrew a simple wooden frame strung with several lengths of gut, each tensioned to a different degree, clearly a device created for demonstration rather than musical performance. "Have you encountered such an instrument before?" he asked, presenting it to Pythagoras. "It is a device used by musicians to establish concordant sounds," Pythagoras replied, recognizing its purpose. "Though simpler than the lyres used for actual composition, it is more than that. It is a key that can unlock one of the most profound mysteries of existence." Pherecydes held the frame with a reverence that suggested its significance far exceeded its humble appearance. "Pluck the strings, one after another." Pythagoras did so, and a sequence of distinct tones resonated in the quiet room, each hanging in the air for a moment before fading, like ripples spreading across still water. "Now," Pherecydes continued, his eyes intent upon Pythagoras's face, watching for the moment of recognition, "observe what occurs when you press down firmly at the exact midpoint of any string and pluck it again." The resulting tone was audibly related to the first, yet distinctly higher, a phenomenon Pythagoras had noted in passing but never deeply pondered, accepting it as simply the way instruments behaved. "A relationship of singular clarity," Pherecydes remarked, a subtle satisfaction evident in his tone. "Now try pressing at a different proportionate length, perhaps 2/3 along the string's length." Again. Pythagoras obeyed, producing another tone that bore a clear and pleasing relationship to the open string. The mathematical relationship was suddenly, startlingly evident, not imposed upon the phenomenon, but inherent within it. The old philosopher's eyes gleamed with the quiet satisfaction of sharing a profound insight. Do you perceive it? The same principles of proportion and relationship that allow a structure to stand, or a tunnel to meet, also create this resonance in sound. The harmony we hear is not arbitrary or merely pleasing by chance. It is mathematically precise, reflecting relationships that can be expressed in pure numbers. And might this same underlying principle of harmonious relationship extend to the movements of the heavens, to the unfurling of a fern, to the very essence of being itself? That night, sleep eluded Pythagoras. He sat outside Pherecydes' dwelling, on a stone bench worn smooth by generations of contemplatives before him, gazing up at the star-strewn immensity of the sky. The air was cool and still, carrying the mingled scents of sea and mountain herbs, and in the profound silence of deep night, the old philosopher's words resonated deeply within him, connecting disparate observations and intuitions into a nascent, more comprehensive vision. The unerring path of the tunnel, the satisfying forms he had seen in Nisars's crystals, the clear relationships between the tones from the stringed instrument, all seemed to be expressions of a single, underlying order. It was as if he had spent his youth gathering scattered, intriguing fragments, each beautiful or compelling in isolation, only now to begin to glimpse how they might fit together to form part of a vast, interconnected design. And with this dawning awareness came both exhilaration and a sobering sense of the journey's magnitude. For if such patterns existed, if the cosmos truly embodied a rational harmony, then to understand this harmony would require not just intellect, but a radical reorientation of one's entire being. It would demand, he intuited, a life dedicated to the progressive unveiling of a truth both mathematically precise and spiritually profound. As the first pale light of dawn began to soften the eastern horizon, Pythagoras felt the cool stone beneath him as if for the first time, aware of how it anchored him to the physical world even as his mind reached toward abstract principles. Here, on this windswept island, under the tutelage of a man who bridged ancient wisdom and emerging philosophy, his true education had begun. The veil of Orpheus. The seasons turned on Syros, and under Pherecydes' patient guidance, Pythagoras's understanding continued to deepen and expand. Yet, even as his intellectual appreciation of cosmic principles grew sharper, he sensed an element that remained elusive, something vital that seemed to lie just beyond the reach of reasoned discourse alone. He confessed this feeling of incompleteness to his teacher one evening as they sat together, watching the sun dip below the Aegean horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues. "You feel the absence of direct experience," Pherecydes nodded, his expression revealing no surprise. "This is a natural stage. What we have discussed, what you have grasped with your keen mind, remains, for you, primarily in the realm of ideas. You comprehend it intellectually, but you have not yet encountered its truth with your entire being. Is there a way to bridge this distance?" Pythagoras asked, a yearning for deeper insight evident in his voice. Pherecydes remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the darkening line where sea and sky merged into an indistinguishable whole. "There are traditions," he said at last, his voice lowered, "older than the verses of Homer, more ancient than the grandest temples dedicated to the Olympians. These traditions offer not merely statements about reality, but pathways to experience it, direct encounters with the underlying truths we have circled in our many discussions." "The mysteries," Pythagoras breathed, the name itself evoking a sense of profound and hidden knowledge, a reference he recognized from fragments Pherecydes had alluded to in earlier conversations. "Yes," often associated with the name of Orpheus, the poet and musician who, as legend tells, journeyed into the shadowy realms of the underworld and returned, forever changed by what he had witnessed. The old philosopher turned to face his pupil directly, his eyes holding a serious light. There are initiatory rites, preserved by those who strive to maintain these ancient traditions. Such rites are not for the merely curious, Pythagoras. They demand sincere preparation, a purification of intent, and an unwavering commitment from those who would seek entry. Where might I find those who keep such traditions? Pythagoras asked, his voice steady despite the subtle tremor of anticipation that ran through him. Eleusis, on the mainland, holds the most renowned of these mysteries, though their focus differs somewhat from the more purely Orphic lines of transmission. But the journey to Eleusis, for one such as you, might well begin with a pilgrimage to Delphi. There, the oracle of Apollo could offer guidance specifically tailored to your unique path and potential. Pherecydes placed a weathered hand on Pythagoras's shoulder. However, this is not a decision to be undertaken lightly. Reflect on this. Return to me in 3 days with your resolve. During those 3 days, Pythagoras sought counsel not only within the depths of his own reflections, but also from Nicarchus and Pythes. His guardians had maintained their presence on Syros, establishing a small workshop in the village below Pherecydes' dwelling, where Nicarchus practiced his intricate gem-engraving craft and Pythes often engaged in thoughtful discussions with those who sought her wisdom. Such mysteries are, by their very nature, unknowable until they are experienced from within, Pythes cautioned when Pythagoras shared Pherecydes' counsel. Yet, throughout the ages, those who have sincerely undergone such initiations often emerge transformed, usually for the better, though not always without a certain cost. What kind of cost? Pythagoras asked, valuing her measured perspective. The abandonment of certainties, she replied, her gaze thoughtful. The shattering of comfortable assumptions. The mysteries do not so much add to what one knows, as reveal the profound limitations of knowing itself. Nicarchus, who had been listening quietly while meticulously working on an intricate carving in a piece of jasper, set aside his fine tools. "I have never undergone a formal initiation of that kind," he said, his voice reflecting his focused, practical nature. "But this I know from my own craft. Whenever my skill has advanced, it has been through moments of surrender, times when I ceased trying to impose my will upon the stone and instead allowed the stone itself to reveal its inherent qualities, its hidden form, to me." On the morning of the 3rd day, Pythagoras returned to Pherecydes' hillside dwelling, his decision clear in his mind. "I will seek the path of the mysteries," he stated with quiet conviction. The old philosopher nodded slowly, a complex emotion visible in his eyes, a blend of pride in his student's courage and a subtle concern for the profound challenges that lay ahead. "Then it is time for me to share something I have held in trust for this moment." He rose with deliberate care and retrieved a ceramic jar from a recess in the cool stone wall. From within it, he extracted rolls of expensive papyrus. "These are letters of introduction," he explained, handing the scroll to Pythagoras, "addressed to the Pythia at Delphi and the hierophants who preside at Eleusis. I prepared them upon your first arrival here, sensing that this day, or one like it, might eventually come." "You anticipated this path for me?" Pythagoras asked, surprised by his teacher's foresight. "I recognized in you a soul that would not long be content with second-hand wisdom or borrowed truths," Pherecydes replied, a rare smile touching his lips. "The mysteries await you, Pythagoras. But always remember, their deepest purpose is not to help you escape from this world, but to enable you to perceive it, and live within it, more truly and more fully.